The author of the novel abuses symbols and makes many spelling mistakes, which makes it difficult for me to convert the text into audio. So I hope you all understand if there are any errors. Please like, share, and follow the Cultivation Audiobooks channel to motivate me to create more videos, and don't hesitate to make requests for the novels you want to listen to. Chapter 1252, Preparing for the main event. Once the meal was done, all the other commanders split up to go to various nightclubs, lounges, and in one case, a host bar, according to their preferences, so they could enjoy the rest of the evening. I will gather everyone in the morning, not too early, and we can go to Absolution, where I will be preparing for the larger gathering of nations. Max informed the other commanders as they left to go truly enjoy the evening. This night of revelry was an important one for everyone. If they were going to solve the staffing and training issues that were plaguing the fleets, they were going to have to take drastic action, and that meant getting every faction allied with the humans involved. They had received positive responses from nearly every powerful group among the humans, and the Alliance would be sending over 2 more envoy teams as well as a large group of representatives that were deemed essential to the negotiations. At this rate, the meeting hall would look more like a coliseum, with the most important few seated down on the main floor, and the other 10,000 in the bleachers above them, all equipped with microphones to speak in turn. With that many people, it was impossible for anything to get completed in a timely manner, so there would be smaller meetings between the upper levels to prioritize the matters that had been raised during the General Assembly and keep things from going off course. Max was definitely not looking forward to it, but there should be plenty of familiar faces there. Nobles from Cygnus, former Kepler military leaders, Alliance members that they had worked with in the past. They had even received a response from the black market, through one of their legitimate cover businesses, stating that they would be sending delegates along with the Alliance force, and giving Max the heads up as to who they really were. Even the Cygnus royal family was coming, in a way. Imperial Prince Wushu was confirmed as a guest, along with Lord General Kirkland and the young Lady Chen, now Princess Chen, after her marriage to the young prince. The generals Yakov and Tennant, as well as Inquisitor General Ming would also be in attendance, and Emperor Ahmed, of the Alliance's myceloid species, now more commonly referred to as the Happy Mushrooms after the Alliance was introduced to the green tide of the myceloid gods horde, were going to be in attendance. The loss of status was well known to bother the Emperor, who had reincarnated countless times, and currently had his successor at the Academy aboard Terminus, but there wasn't much he could do about it. Compared to the massive green monsters on the other side, his people really were rather squishy and friendly. The meeting was turning into the largest gala that this portion of the universe had ever seen, and they had even invited the Kaleska and a number of other species from the anomaly region to attend so that they could keep up to date on current events, and make more connections that might be useful to keep their fleet's combat effective. Most of them didn't use much Alliance technology, often because of the physical compatibility, but they did like some of the weapons and the shields. With so many people to respond to, Max wasn't the least bit apologetic when he finally woke everyone up close to noon the next day. It wasn't easy to get them moving, and one of the Reaver commanders, who had voiced her disdain for the idea of a late-night massage, sent away not 1 or 2 but 3 young men from the host club after Max's call. With the ship operating non-stop, he didn't know how long it had been since they left the club, but they were certainly looking a bit worse for wear when he saw them leaving in their disheveled uniforms that morning. Compared to that, the handful of people leaving from the other suites was quite tame. Eventually, they had everyone gathered at a shuttle bay, ready for transfer to Absolution, while their ships would remain on station nearby, to save on docking space which was about to become very precious aboard even a vessel as large as that world ship. The gathered commanders straightened their clothing one last time as the shuttle made it to Absolution, and Nico smirked at them. "There's no need for that. This is a private dock, and the only people here are us. My research team normally greets us at the door, but they are busy today, and very few others have access," she explained. "Oh, what have they been working on?" the commander next to her asked. "The integration of the quantum computing cores with the holographic projectors to create assistance. The technology is stable and useful already, but they think that they can enhance it to have more capable personal assistants made at a more reasonable energy cost. The current ones are incredibly energy intensive," Nico explained. Everyone else gave her a jealous look, as they had heard that the Reaver Council got new AI assistants, but the design was proprietary and exclusive. They weren't available to anyone else, no matter what price was offered. But if the team here was working on cost-cutting measures, that meant they designed them, and they would have access to them, possibly as welcoming gifts to the highest-ranking nobles and others attending the ceremony. While they were all Reaver commanders, they didn't have the level of clout that Alliance envoys, Cygnus princes and others with massive fleets did. The chances of them getting access to the AI personal assistants was incredibly low in the short term, and even their home ships didn't have that level of computing power. Don't worry, as soon as we get past the initial phases and get the cost under control, we will be making them widely available. Having an AI assistant to handle the drudgery of your daily schedule and drag you out of bed in the morning is going to revolutionize the job of a commander. I know for me, just having the AI available aboard the world ship cut the amount of unnecessary work by 90%, and the total workload by over half. Felicity, the integrated AI here aboard Absolution, has been a blessing for the board of directors since her arrival. They might not see it that way, as she was constantly hounding them to finish projects that she assigned, but things ran much more smoothly on Absolution than any other organization with a government-to-population ratio that small. Chapter 1253. The guests arrived the next morning. Max woke up to absolute chaos in the minds of the people aboard Absolution. It was no secret that there were countless dignitaries gathering for a massive meeting about an overhaul of the military deployment and procurement issues that they had been facing, but the star-studded lineup that had actually come to the ship was beyond anyone's expectations. Anyone who was anyone had made a point of arriving for the meeting. Not just Major Reaver and other political leaders, there were pop music idols, viral video stars, legendary podcasters, gamers and minor celebrities of all sorts. That was before the real big guns began to arrive, with much less fanfare, but much more paparazzi coverage. The leaders of the Hunters, Valkia, and Shin arrived together with Myceloid Emperor Ahmed. Then, to everyone's surprise, even the Coven leader of the vampires came to the meeting in person. He was the closest thing that any species had to an eternal leader, as he had held the office for nearly 1,000 years already, and it was extremely rare that he would come out in public. Then Prince Wushu and Lady Chen arrived together, sending the crowd into a frenzy. Max hadn't realized until now that they were actually quite famous in their own right, with an international podcast of mecha design theories that featured a small Inu tech nomad group, and the adorable faces of two young royals who were pushing technological advancements in the field of soldier and worker safety. Max thought it was something like the appeal of cat videos. Cute things doing cute things. Even if it was viable technology that would save lives, the most important part was to get people to watch it, so they could integrate it into future designs and orders of their own. In a time when planets were getting raided without notice, anyone who could manage it wanted some sort of defensive weaponry or shielding at their home and place of work. So, that was what the young royal couple focused on. Not just new technologies and theories, but the most adorable practical tests of popular budget equipment, and some off-label ideas for industrial gear that the military definitely wouldn't approve of. That was the benefit of the civilian defense forces, though. Like the Planetary Guard, the rules were much more lax around what they could and couldn't do, and repurposing farm equipment and mining gear into weapons with a few tweaks might void the warranty, but it didn't affect the IP rights agreements that the militaries had to abide by. The Reavers had made most of their gear open source for that reason, but the Alliance still clung desperately to the multi-generational conglomerates pushing outdated technology to keep their wealth up. Since that was what was available, that was what the group reviewed. The entire district around them was just insufferably hyper at the moment, so Max turned his attention to other areas of the world ship, where more sane minds should prevail. But today, they also let him down. The Illithid had sent in an elder for the meeting, a famous researcher into mental powers who had made great breakthroughs in the advanced mental skills training field in his youth, and they were holding some sort of interlinked thought brainstorming session. It wasn't emotional, but it was incredibly intense, and Max had no intention of getting in the middle of that. There was one calm area in the storm of activity aboard the ship that morning, and that was the crew quarters. Everyone was doing their best to catch up on sleep before they were called in for additional guard duties, shifts at work and other entirely predictable side effects of a massive influx of dignitaries. Since they knew that the upcoming days were going to be chaos, they were mentally preparing themselves right now, as Max was hoping to do. Of course, as Reavers, that mental preparation varied in form from extra sleep to stockpiling energy drinks and liquor before the influx of people caused power rationing, and they had to wait for the replicators to get to their spot in the queue to refill their drinks. If it got really out of hand, the queue had been known to get up to 5 minutes long, which only sounded short when your beer wasn't empty. Generals Yakov and Tennant had just arrived, and were currently doing their best to find reasons not to go out into the public areas of the ship, where they would have to face the paparazzi and the reporters who were all eager to get an early scoop on the potential direction of the meetings. Generals, why don't you come and meet with me before you head out? I have a fresh bottle of rum with me, and we can have a nice long talk until the reporters go away. Max suggested, as an urgent text sent straight to their inbox. We will be there in 5 minutes, assuming that your androids know the way. General Tennant replied only seconds later. The old generals were both mostly retired now, and General Tennant working as a judge for the Reavers part-time, but when it came to valuable insights about how to keep planets safe, they still have more knowledge than almost anyone else in the species. After all, they had been there, in every sort of forsaken hellhole, and they had come up with ways to survive. The hope was that they could apply that on a larger scale and help everyone else do it as well. But that would have to wait for later. There were too many reporters outside, with too many questions, and they were going to have a drink with the local commander, as was customary when visiting friends and allies. General Tennant smiled to himself at the thought that if he were a civilian, Max would only just be old enough to drink, if anyone was brave enough to ask him his real age. So much had changed since the two of them had met, and even their home nation was gone already, replaced and converted into part of the new factions among the politicians. That settled it. He was getting nostalgic, the first sign that he really did need a drink. Chapter 1254. Calm before the swarm. Max and Nico sat across from Generals Tennant and Yakov in the library attached to Max's suites. It was somewhat ridiculous and luxurious to have a room full of actual paper books in this day and age, but Felicity had insisted on it, and each of the special tomes that she had created had a memory crystal in the cover with thousands of terabytes of data on it, related to the topic inside. The crystals were stable and would last for an eternity if they weren't destroyed, so the room actually served as a knowledge repository, should their battles be lost and absolution left derelict to float in the stars and be recovered by some future civilization the way that creeping darkness had been. This is quite the room you've got. I know that each commander has a different taste for their sitting room, but somehow I didn't take you for one who would choose to fill it with books. General Tennant noted as he took his seat. Max gestured to the shelves of books. Each of them has the comprehensive knowledge of the topic they were written about contained in a storage crystal in their binding. It's more than just a library, it is a true repository of humanity's knowledge. But I let Felicity, the ship's AI, design it for me, and this was what she came up with for the perfect spot to quietly relax and welcome friends. The two old men smiled at Max's description. They had gone well beyond being his mentors and commanders. It was true to say that they were his friends now, even if they were old enough to be his grandfathers. But, like a proper grandfather, they would happily sit, drink rum and swap war stories until the small hours of the morning. Well, maybe not that long, as it was still first thing in the morning, but once the news of the next big arrival spread they should be safe to head out to their quarters without anyone bothering them. The press was fickle and there were too many potential stories to bother waiting on a pair of old soldiers for long. We've read the messages about the change in design plans so that everyone is not so unified in appearance and function. It makes a lot of sense from a combat standpoint, and even in Kepler, different regions and units used different equipment, with individual factory planets focused on producing single items, for efficiency. The imbalance seems to come from the fact that your two world ships have so much more capability than the competition that they're messing up the system. If we get some of the smaller groups to band together and focus their production instead of taking orders as they get them, it will make things a lot easier for everyone. The problem will be convincing them that there is an actual greater good to be served here that outweighs the requests of their loyal clients. Customer relationships are everything to the Reaver companies, so if we're going to ask them to focus on a single design or product to make and sell, there has to be enough of an upside to it for them. Max sighed in comfort as he adjusted himself on the buttery soft leather of the chair. Or I could make another couple of world ships, and they could make everything else, one product at a time. We might have to stock them with androids, though. We're running desperately short on people, and even with the refugees that we have taken in, it's going to be a long road to getting creeping darkness fully crewed and operational. General Tennant laughed at the thought. They already had dozens of android-piloted, AI-operated colony ships out in the galaxy, committed to a brutal war. What were a couple of world ships? But the negative mental impact on the people to find out that the mightiest of space vessels that their species had created wasn't for them would be immeasurable. Humanity had to feel that they were important, that they were leading the way, and that they were making a difference in the battle. Without that, They would lose morale, so if they were completely severed from either the production or use of war equipment, it would be a disaster on the public relations front. As fun as that sounds, we all know there are a dozen reasons not to do it, and they're all good reasons. Don't worry, they'll argue about it for hours and then everyone will come up with something that works, even if it's not the way that we would have imagined it working. That's how it always goes when things get hard. The more minds we throw at a problem, the more creative the solution. General Yakov announced. But enough about work. I heard that you managed to find out a lot of interesting facts about the start of the Great War from the AI on Creeping Darkness. Is there anything juicy hidden in those details? Lovers spat. Maybe a great falling out, some sort of reason that would make this all make sense. General Tennant asked. That was still a work-related question, Max was certain, but he didn't have much of an answer for him. Sorry, General, there isn't anything to really tell. None of us know why things got started the way that they did, and the only ones who have been around long enough that they could tell us either forgot or aren't talking. Nico laughed. I like that. Let's start spreading a rumor that the whole matter started because some filthy neckbeard of a god got turned down by the lovely human goddess, and the whole situation is just an eternal case of incel rage. If nothing else, it should keep the people entertained. The generals nearly choked on their rum at the thought. The news would have a field day with that sort of rumor, even if it was completely unsubstantiated. All they would have to do was find some sketchy pseudoscience that suggested that the protector of humanity was a beautiful goddess, and they could let the online community's inherently degenerate nature do the rest. Well, we can keep it in mind if we ever truly need a ray of hope. How about we find some snacks to go with this rum? The cameras still show paparazzi stationed outside the office floor, waiting for someone to come out. General Yakov joked. Best idea I've heard all day. I don't suppose there is a replicator in here. General Tennant agreed. But of course, we put them everywhere these days. Chapter 1255. Dinner engagement. Once the furor around the arrival of the dignitaries had died down, a calculated matter of timed arrival splitting the attention of the paparazzi all over the world ship, Max and the generals decided that it was safe enough to come out of hiding in his office and go socialize with the others. There was an arranged dinner party tonight, and supposedly there was some secret big news that was going to be released by the Alliance leadership as well. They had been keeping it closely guarded, and even Max didn't yet know what the secret was, as the last guests from the Alliance hadn't arrived yet. The names on the ship's log would clearly be faked for privacy, but once they were in the same solar system as he was, it wouldn't be difficult to find out. Before that, they should make some public appearances together, let people take photographs so that the residents would know that they were on board and paying attention to the festivities, and then meet up with a few others, as if it were by chance. With Max in the group, it wouldn't be hard, and he could pick out the location of the ones that he wanted to meet with in advance, as well as the topics that they were interested in. Nico, on the other hand, was already somewhat in public, though her actual body was hidden. She had come online as the judge for a gaming event, and millions of people were watching the infamous Blood Goddess introduce the day's contestants for another new VR fighting game, this time a mecha simulator based on the line mecha that were so popular with planetary defense forces now that they were being decommissioned by the main military force. There were hundreds of millions of them in existence, and although they weren't a main force frontline unit anymore, they were still incredibly deadly compared to anything else with their production cost in the human arsenal. The PDF, as the homegrown forces were collectively known, was the People's Army, the fighting force of the ones not chosen for interstellar military duty, of the farmers, factory workers and law enforcement agencies when their home was attacked. In short, the game was an immediate smash hit, and the controls of the mecha were so realistic that the most skilled players were actually being trained into top-notch mecha pilots. It was absolutely brilliant, and when the next major wave of attacks happened, the casualties among the planetary residents should be even lower than they had managed the first time. The first wave had the help of the Arisen and the Darklings to repel the force, as neither of them had permanent planetary bases of their own, as entirely mobile cultures, but the human force was improving again, and the Alliance was finally getting their act together and organizing itself for war. The problem was, there was a lack of training, and no real recruitment structure. That was the central focus of these meetings, along with the secondary matter of what the equipment they were using should look like. Why don't we go visit some fun people first? There is an Innu envoy among the regular crew here on Absolution, permanently stationed by the Alliance as one of the intermediaries between the Reavers and the government. She is currently planning to escape from her assistants and make her way to a coffee shop to get drunk. If we rescue her, We can sit on the patio and drink coffee with a group of alliance leaders for publicity, and they won't expect us to do real work today. Max offered. Oh, that's good. The paparazzi know only to take pictures of the envoys, and not to bother them or get in their faces. If we're with some of them, we're practically invincible to annoyance. General Yakov agreed. Tenant chuckled. Speaking of annoyances, where is your lovely wife today? The old general laughed and shook his head. She's down on Ray 5, having a ladies' day, as she calls her all-day spa treatments. She very devoutly did not want to be here for this, and she had no intentions of sitting through the meetings. I think most of it is due to that rivalry she has going on with Mary Tareth. Can you believe that she actually managed to show up early to 2 events in a row, wearing the same outfit my wife had chosen? We had to stop halfway there both times when we saw the event feed so that she could change. Max definitely wouldn't put that past Mary. She could be incredibly petty when she wanted to be, and the two of them were distantly related, if Max recalled right, so they likely spent a fair bit of time together. Let them have their internal competition. As I recall, the women of the Tareth family have a long history of internal rivalry, and given their personalities, it's best if the men keep their noses safely out of other people's business. Max laughed. General Yakov nodded. You are young, but wise. But then, you're essentially married into the Tareth family as well, aren't you? Even if there is no ring or vow, you have spent your entire career with Nico Tareth attached to your hip. Even I associate the two of you with each other first, then the company and the family. I'm not sure if I should be frightened or flattered, but I do sense some interesting thoughts coming toward the ship. I know what tonight's big announcement will be. Max declared. Not in public, there are likely hidden ears listening to us. But once we're with the envoys, and we have a chance to talk in private, we can go over it. General Tennant reminded him. It was going to be a great one, Max knew. The group in the last incoming ship full of dignitaries were all retainers of the Valkyria's presidential family, along with one happy couple. While the presidential family weren't royalty, per se, they were trillionaires that ruled over 50 different planets and had held seats on the Central Government Committee for 5 generations, by popular vote. There weren't many who could compare to them, so if one of them was making a public wedding announcement, the actual details of the military conference would be secondary, and this would be portrayed as one of the most luxurious wedding receptions in history. Chapter 1256. Honeymooners. Max took a moment to decide where he was going to go first. The question was if it was to collect the Innu envoy or if he should head straight to the meeting area to welcome the members of the Valkyria royal family. If the envoy was that desperate for coffee, she likely already knew, and that meant the other envoys should be brought along as well. So, he planned to intercept her on the way. Let's stop for coffee, then intercept the Innu ambassador and everyone who is trying to stop her from hiding from her work for the day. We will bring them all along with us to the reception area on the docks, where the next guests will be arriving. I think that will be the most time-efficient course of action, and if I am right, we will all want to be caffeinated for this. Max explained. Well, no soldier turns down caffeine or a nap, so we're in. It sounds like this is going to be the highlight of the day, but do you think it will be enough to stop the cameras from annoying everyone else to death? General Tennant asked. I can almost guarantee it, especially for the Alliance news operations. Compared to some boring meeting of political leaders, this is going to be much more juicy gossip. That was loud enough for a few nearby paparazzi to hear him, as Max had intended, and they scurried off to find reinforcements and subtly tail Max and the others to the meeting area, in case it wasn't the same spot that they were expecting. He had said that it was big news, but that didn't mean that it was some top dignitary. The pop idols had all arrived from the VIP civilian docks, but the politicians came in from the military side and didn't appear directly in the public eye. Which direction they went would tell the paparazzi a lot about what sort of important news they were about to receive, but to their great confusion, not only did Commander Max order coffees to go from a corner shop, he ordered 2 Innu specials with it, extra raspberry, extra espresso, and then turned toward the residential areas. The mystery was solved when he met up with the envoys, who were walking down the street together, but then they all got into a private transport and took off faster than the reporters could arrange to follow. The VIP public docks, they're headed straight for them, get all our people there now, the reporter ordered his underlings. They didn't know what sort of story they had stumbled on, but if it was big enough to make the commander of the Terminus Trading Company smile and assume that the cameras would be off of him, it had to be galaxy-shaking huge news. The Innu envoy nearly vibrated with joy as she sipped the second latte, after having downed the first in a single long gulp. So, what is this big news? I know there is a ship under government protection coming, but that's it, they didn't tell us anything else. She asked. I think it would be more fun to learn as it happens, but the air of authority of the envoys is important, so I'll give Yo the heads up now. The Valkia President's daughter is about to announce her engagement to the crown prince of somewhere called Salamat. He seems important, and the two of them are all over each other, to the point that even the Illithid have noticed stopped their discussion with the elder to see if they've been drugged. Max explained. Oh, that is huge news. Salamat is a galaxy within the Valkia territory. The crown prince is filthy rich, set to take over an entire galaxy, and apparently he's one of the most eligible bachelors in the entire species. His every move is enough to make news and trending videos, so if they're coming here to announce their engagement, they're about to become one of the most popular power couples in the Alliance. If nobody knew who the Terminus Trading Company was, you would instantly become famous by association, just because they picked you. But because you're already one of the most popular vacation destinations in the known universe, you can expect your resort facilities to be packed with requests for at least 2 months. If there are plans to open more, you should likely do that now, and have them open by tomorrow, because you've got about 2 hours before the booking lines go insane. The other envoys nodded in agreement, and the Valkia envoy looked a little jealous. Max smiled at the black-winged man. Is she that much of a beauty that it's a shame to see another man steal her heart away? The envoy laughed. Not on my behalf, I'm a good friend of the president, her father. I had hoped that my son might have a shot, but if she's gone for some big shot playboy, there's nothing to be done about it. The others all laughed at his optimism. They might be family friends, but she was way out of his son's league. The boy had mediocre ambitions, talent and appearances. Not bad, but certainly not the sort of guy who would attract the attention of the greatest supermodels of his species. Well, at the very least, I can get myself into a few photos with her to make the boy jealous. We do have priority to greet them as they enter, do we not? He asked. Of course. Who else on this ship could usurp my authority to welcome VIP guests? If anyone, it would be Nico, but she's busy with a gaming tournament at the moment, and she won't be finished for some time. We're safe on that front. Max laughed. Man, it's good to know all the right people. Now, let's go get ourselves in the news for a split second before the big news is out. Do you think that they will enter together or separately? Max thought about that for a second, then smirked. I have asked them to come out separately for a quick greeting, and then they can go to each other for a touching show of love. Their PR manager is eating us up, so I don't think it will be an issue. Chapter 1257. Diversion tactic. The first few from the newly arrived vessel disembarked, attracting a small amount of attention from the gathered paparazzi, and then carried on toward the Absolution staff, who were waiting to bring them to their rooms to get settled in. Then the groom-to-be, the Playboy trillionaire's heir, stepped out into the reception area, and Max had to smile at the level of effort he had put into his appearance for this moment. His skin lightly sparkled with a glitter-infused oil, his wings' feathers were dusted with water to give them a glowing ambience in the ship's natural lighting, and his outfit was immaculately pressed. Welcome to Absolution. I am Commander Karis Max, and these are the Generals Tennant and Yakov, now both retired and working with the Reaver Council. Max introduced them. Generals, it is a pleasure to meet you in person. I have spoken to you on conference calls before. Commander Max, it is an honor to be here aboard your vessel. If there is time later in my stay, I would like to speak with you about commissioning a new flagship for my family's Galactic Defense Force. He replied. Max smiled and shook his hand. That is the specialty of the Terminus Trading Company. Just let me know what time will be good for you, and we can make arrangements to have it made exactly to your requirements. That exchange of pleasantries alone would normally be enough to make headlines for a week. The Crown Prince of Salumit commissioning a potential world ship-class vessel from the Terminus Trading Company was huge news, especially given that the Terminus vessels that were already in existence were known as the height of luxury and entertainment. The highest of VIP classes couldn't even compare to the areas where commoners like them were allowed to be. There was an entire private island for them on the second level when they visited, and it was off-limits to all other travel. That was mostly to eliminate the headaches of paparazzi for the dignitaries, but making the public appearances also mattered, so it wasn't far from the unofficial party capital of the second level, Inuvia Resort and Casino. Close enough that if it weren't for the distortion barrier preventing anything from being seen clearly, the two could actually watch each other party on the beaches if they used binoculars. The rumors about the private island were even more crazy than the reality, which was luxurious enough that even the VIP guests had a habit of stopping to take photos, and not just for social media clout. The Crown Prince stepped forward to greet the reporters, while his entourage moved to secure the area, which was already carefully locked down by Felicity's android security officers, and then the bride-to-be, the daughter of the Valkyria president, walked out. Unlike almost all the other Valkyria Max had seen, her wings were snow white, as was her skin, while her hair was a shockingly gold blonde that Max was certainly came from a salon. She was stunning in a gold dress and sandals, dressed for an outing at a beach resort, and half the cameras had already forgotten that the Crown Prince was right in front of them. The president's daughter smiled at Max as she walked up, and spoke in a whisper. "Thank you for the ideas, I sincerely appreciate it. There is a proper formal announcement event tomorrow, and I do hope that we have received your RSVP." Max nodded. "Indeed you have. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I am absolutely certain that we will speak again soon. Now, go have fun." She gave a slight curtsy to Max's polite bow, and then ran over in a carefully choreographed moment of joy to wrap her arms around her fiancé and led him out of the landing bay to a more photogenic spot, deliberately created for just this type of situation. They held the pose for a full second as they embraced before moving to the reception area to speak to the cameras. As they left, and their staff followed the baggage out of the area, only Max and the generals were left in the room. No, that wasn't quite right. There was one Inu with a camera and a reporter's badge still giving them adoring looks. "Were you hoping for an interview, Miss Reporter?" Max asked. She couldn't be from one of the major outlets, or she would have had a proper camera person with her, but the level of starstruck in her mind was enough that it was clear that she was here for him. "Yes, please Commander. I am Destiny from the Mecha Life and Development podcast, and if you have even a few seconds, I would appreciate it," she replied. A podcast? That was surprising. She really was thinking like a reporter. But then, the tech nomads did podcasts as well. It was just part of Inu culture. Plus, if she got a reporter badge, her reach had to be 100 million daily viewers, so her podcast group was not a small one. "Follow us right this way, and we can answer some questions while the others go insane outside. We wouldn't want to interfere with their moment in the spotlight," Max instructed, and led the reporter down a service corridor and into a sitting room that was intended for staff meetings. The reporter clapped her hands, and the backpack she was wearing expanded into a full photo set backdrop, holographically projected on the room, plus 4 chairs and a small banner with the name of the podcast. It was like sitting at the announcer's table for a sporting event with the way the camera was positioned, so she would be intending to treat this as a panel discussion. "Good morning and thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Viewers, we have a real treat for you today. Commander Karis Max of the Terminus Trading Company, and the war hero Generals Tennant and Yakov, both legendary Phalanx-class mecha pilots of the previous generation. You are all in for a real treat today." The generals looked at Max and tried to keep a professional expression. What had he gotten them into with this obvious mecha fangirl? Chapter 1258, Giving Interviews. The reporter continued. "As our regular viewers all know, we do a weekly segment on the legends of mecha development, and today we have not one but 3 of them here with us in person. All 3 of these heroes were at the Battle of Belmont, a turning point in the Kepler Rebellion. The images of their 3 mecha appeared behind them, and the 3 pilots gave a nostalgic smile for the scene. It was a long time since Max had seen Stalwart, which now lived in a museum in Camor, and the 2 Phalanx-class units had likewise been mothballed and put on display as showpieces of military history. I see that the mere sight of them brings back many memories. For our viewers, how long were you with those mecha before moving on to retirement? Are, in the case of Commander Max, a new unit?" General Yakov gestured up at the image of his mecha. "We were together for 36 years. 28 of those were spent on the battlefield, and the rest in reserve or in transit." The reporter's odd gaze made the old general give her an indulgent smile. He had spent more time in combat after he had gotten a commission as a Phalanx-class pilot than she had been alive for. General Tennant gestured to the shining darkness. "We were together for almost a century before I retired. Do your readers know much of the history of the units?" The reporter's head bounced like a bobblehead doll as she nodded. "They do. We actually sent a team member to Camor to do a full history episode on the shining darkness. Stalwart as well, but unfortunately, there aren't any others available for public viewing." "Tareth's Rage isn't open to the public?" Max asked. The reporter shook her head. "It's visible, but it's got some sort of special coating on it that they don't want people to touch, so even with an investigative pass, our team wasn't allowed into its enclosure. So that was what they meant. The reporters couldn't look inside of it, they could only see the outside in the public data, whereas with Stalwart and Shining Darkness, they had gotten the chance to actually touch it and look inside. Well, for all the legendary events that happened during that chaotic time, Stalwart and Tereth's Rage were only together for a few years before they were put back into the waiting reserve and finally transferred to the Khmor Mecha Museum after the new generation of units was ready. Max shrugged. About that, there is a wear pattern on the console below the control sticks. Do you prefer to hold them low, with your fingers turned up, or did you have something resting under your hands? The reporter asked, bringing up an image of the control panel behind them. As expected of the Innu, they skipped straight to the point when they wanted to talk about Mecha. They weren't here for war stories, or detailed personal questions about the pilots' lives, they wanted to know about the Mecha. How they performed, how they were used, the little tips and tricks that made for a legendary Mecha pilot. It was especially important to the Innu lately, as many of them were taking up Mecha piloting in the military or the planetary defense forces, and not just remaining as the service staff. The more that they could learn about the practical tips and tricks that weren't in the books, the more comprehensive their own style development could be. The two generals both smiled at the mark on the control panel. It was a bit too far from the stick to be the hand, unless you were holding it at some strange angle. What the mark was actually from was the stainless steel Kepler military issue coffee cup. Max laughed and gestured to the mark. Do you see how it's oblong, and wide? While at first glance, that appears to be from a gloved hand moving against the painted console as the operator fought, the real answer is very different. That particular mark is from the magnetic base of the steel coffee cups we are issued, as it slides back and forth with use. It takes thousands of cups of coffee to get that sort of wear pattern, that's months of tense waiting for the enemy to attack, while in a situation where you can't leave your mecha. The reporter's eyes lit up with joy. He had directly answered one of the most popular questions that their readers had. Why right there, there is a cup holder on the far right side of the console, here. She gestured to a highlighted spot on the image. General Tennant gave her a fatherly smile that made the reporter look even younger. There should be a similar one inside Creeping Darkness. You see, that spot is not only right in front of the pilot, so he doesn't have to look away from the display screens, but it is within arm's reach of the right control stick, so even if you are reaching for a drink when an emergency happens, you are actually improving your reaction times. With the one on the side, which was placed there to protect the delicate electronics of the control panel from spilled coffee, you are out of position, the auto tensioner of the harness can't react as quickly, and your eyes are off the screen, so you might not see the enemy's position at all. It is a utility versus safety trade-off. While the spilled coffee drives the technicians insane, it is still the most practical spot for the cup. Doesn't the Kepler-issued cup have a lid, though? She asked. It does, but the hole is too small, you can only slowly sip through it. That's not how mecha pilots traditionally consume caffeine. It has to be hot, strong, and now, I'm not sipping it for this interview was a great idea. They were not only going to have an excuse not to be in public, but they were also being asked decent questions from someone who actually cared about the answers. Chapter 1259. Rage and Desperation. While Max was happily holding meetings about the small details of being a mecha pilot, the rebel gods were holding a meeting about Max. Divine One, that being cannot be allowed to mature any further. Already, it has too much power, and it can defeat our subordinates even when outnumbered. A tiger-bodied god was explaining to the dark cloud that was the body of their leader. Then send the greater energy beings, the ones derived directly from one of us being shattered. The rebel god known as the Divine One scoffed. That is what I am saying, he can defeat them, even when they outnumber him. One-on-one, he farms them for their energy to strengthen himself. I believe that he is evolving in the direction of a god of devouring. The tiger god explained. Impossible, they are one step from divinity, no mortal can defeat them completely. Just give them a few weeks to recuperate and send larger numbers next time. The Divine One didn't even bother to use its actual voice to respond. The tiger god gave a pleading look to its companions, hoping that they would take pity on it and help it to explain the situation to the Divine One without enraging the leader of the rebel gods. Divine One, it has the favor of the war god, the leader of the Green Tide. It has truly killed and absorbed over a half-dozen of our subordinates. If this continues, that creature will reach the power of a weak god. One of the others tried. The Divine One paused, and cast its attention into the dead zone, where the creature should be hiding. Only, it wasn't hiding at all. It was drinking and laughing with the other mortal species, telling jokes about killing the loyal servants of the divine armies. The Divine One was immediately enraged, and its aura surged, destroying the room around it, and throwing the other gods hundreds of meters away. Find a way to get to it. It must die now, the Divine One ranted. For a moment, they sensed the amusement of the god of war, the myceloid god, as the humans called it, and then it was gone, presumably to warn its human champion. That damnable beast was never reliable. It only helped because we were losing too badly, and it wanted a better fight. One of the gods muttered as it sensed the presence. That's true, but can any of us afford to offend it? Another whispered back, my people, I have decided. The dead zone will no longer be allowed to exist. With all our might, we will invade and wipe out the mortal races, these descendants of the humans. You have 24 hours to prepare. The gods scattered in fear, both of the Divine One, and of what it demanded. The gods of the dead zone were not truly dead, they were deprived of energy and waiting to revive. Unless the gods themselves tore apart the fabric of space and time to join the battle, those corpses would suck their army dry in a matter of hours, and if the entire army went, that might be enough to revive both of the defeated gods. That was a risk that they never wanted to take. The human god was a monster, willing to put its chosen people above its own kind, and the god of time was an existence that should never have existed in the first place. They had once followed it, and served it loyally, but with its time manipulation gone, they could also grow, and the power of the universe wasn't all funneled to a handful of gods powerful enough to challenge the god of time. Though they were loyal to its ideology, none of them wanted to see the god of time revived. Mighty armies of energy beings were assembled, assured that the Divine One had a plan to successfully invade the dead zone. 1 billion battleships were armed and loaded with hastily created bodies, ones filled with only the most basic of memories and emotions, the bloody warriors, shock troops created by the gods and greater energy beings. Along with them, every bit of the ethereal energy of their layer of space was condensed into lesser energy beings, that could be used to both fight the enemy and to refill the energy that was lost as the dead gods tried to drain the greater energy beings dry. The humans and their allies would never know what hit them. One way or another, this was going to be the final battle of the eternal war, and only one side knew that it was coming. On Max's side, the humans were partying as the engagement news of the Alliance's new greatest power couple spread through the world ship, but Max and some other elite military forces had managed to sneak off to the development bays to take a look at the newest mecha units that had been designed to deal with the great enemy. It's beautiful, General Tennant sighed as he looked over the design of the new mecha. It's based on the ancient Titan-class mecha, upgraded with all the newest technology, and thanks to Nico, we can now consider these a demigod-class mecha. They harness the stolen power of the energy beings in a special power pack, and can use it to stabilize their structure when they are attacked. It's not quite as good as what the ancient god-class mecha could accomplish, but each of these units should be able to kill a greater energy being with relative ease, and take its power to refuel themselves. Max explained. There were 2 units stood off to the side, the custom units that had been created for Max and Nico, whose bodies had been infused with energy from the other layers, and who could create the energy themselves. Nico could only convert a trickle of energy, and didn't have the storage that Max did, but it would be enough in most combat situations. The energy being's life force was only a preventative measure to get past their defenses, a coating for the attacks to make the destruction easier, not their entire attack method. Nico looked up at the mecha with pride. Next time, we will be ready for them. With one of these sent to every star system to lead their defense forces, the great enemy will stand no chance of breaking our lines. Just give me 6 months and there will be enough to go around. Chapter 1260. The sky is falling. The blaring of the emergency alarm the next morning woke Max from a deep slumber. Something had been detected on long-range scanners by the Alliance, and it had panicked them enough that they were calling every single commander and military leader into a mass conference call. They were so concerned about something that they hadn't even sent details directly to the communicators. This level of security was usually reserved for the most important of military announcements, but they shouldn't be sent on such a wide scale that Max could tell that thousands of dignitaries aboard Absolution had received them. The meeting began only a single minute after the message was sent, a testament to the urgency that Alliance leaders felt when they were communicating it. Attention everyone, thank you for coming. We have an existential threat level report. Massive spatial fluctuations have been detected in the void around the Alliance territory. The patterns are identical to the preparations for the last round of assaults, but the signals are 100 times more intense, with an area that cannot be discerned by our scans. From what our experts can discern, the great enemy is intending to send an attack fleet to every single star system in the Alliance, all at once. There is nothing that we can do to block this, and even with the help of the Arisen and the Knife Ears, there is an uncertain chance that any of our civilizations will survive the first wave of attacks. As for the second wave and the consolidation, the odds appear to be even worse. The time to arrival should be less than 1 day, so we are requesting that all troops and armed vessels return to their home systems and prepare for planetary defense. May your deity of choice be with you all. Max immediately sent a message to Terminus, who wouldn't have received the message, and sent them further into the uninhabited spaces, looking for signs of lost civilizations. Their expedition plan was only a third of the way through, but Max framed the message as a hot lead in an extremely remote region that didn't currently support life. Even if the great enemy was looking for hidden human colonies, they wouldn't find Terminus there, with its million tourists and residents. They came from a wide enough variety of species that the colony ship could again serve its original purpose if necessary, and then Max turned his attention to defense. They had the finest of military vessels in the universe right here, and they were making more as fast as they could, so there was a real possibility that Ray 5 would survive the first wave without issues. With that in mind, the Reaver Council was already sending out vessels to take defensive positions around the various colonies that they had agreements with, and bringing all the planetary guards in the galaxy online for emergency drills. Likewise, the Alliance was fully mobilizing what they had, though they were actually only in the early stages of planning for their own defense. They had gotten some new equipment, but there was minimal training, little organization or oversight, and almost no tactical coordination. From what Max's thoughts could tell from the ongoing conversations, there were only about 6 species that could be fully counted on to be ready, and a few dozen others that had some hidden firepower from their expansion era still tucked away for a rainy day. It wasn't encouraging, but at the very least, every populated system in the humans' galaxy had their military on full alert after 2 hours, with more armed vessels showing up by the second. Terminus Trading Company had made every one of their design schematics available royalty-free for the day, and the humans were stocking up on all the best new goodies, with the Reavers loading entire cargo bays full of android-piloted mecha. The Innu were doing the same, while the Valkia had ordered every household with an able-bodied adult to create as many Archangel exoskeletons as they thought that they could use. It was a huge power drain on every planet in the Alliance, but between the Valkia, the Innu and the Giants, they should at least have some fighting forces that were equipped, even if they didn't have many with experience. How is the production of the demigod class Mecha coming? The Innu envoy asked Nico once the notification came that there was nothing else to be done before the enemy arrived. The Alliance had created as many fighting forces as their power supply could sustain, and they were out of people who knew how to operate the ones that couldn't feasibly be run by AI. There was no more power for android creation, unless they cut back on the mecha and heavy weapons production, but many planets had switched to arming shuttles, pleasure yachts and orbital mining vessels. If it moved in space or in the air, they intended to give it more guns. We have 1,000 of them now, and the pilots are inside getting acquainted. That's not enough for every star system in this galaxy, but it will cover about a quarter. The deployment plan is to have them cover systems that lack the ability to repel a force at the level of the last invasion. We wanted a force that could handle that plus 50%, but there simply wasn't enough time. She explained. Is there a fallback plan? The envoy asked. Yes, it's been sent to all the Reavers. Does the Alliance have an equivalent? Max asked. We do, I'll trade you the data. We're with you for this fight, our vessel has been repurposed for planetary defense at home. The giant envoy announced as he walked into the research bays. Then we're glad to have you. Pick the department you would like to join, and we will make sure they recognize your authority. Max replied. Alert. Spatial fluctuations have begun in the Ray 5 system. Beginning anti-portal countermeasures. All travel is now restricted. Felicity announced. Preparing to deploy countermeasures. Sylvie agreed. Between the two of them, they were confident that they could force the enemy to arrive at the outer reaches of the solar system, where they would be easy targets for the freshly rebuilt defensive weapons. Chapter 1261. Homefield Advantage. The anti-portal countermeasures were a new way of using an existing weapon. The fleets used destabilized antimatter torpedoes to make it impossible for a portal to open properly nearby. The weapons themselves didn't do much damage, but the effect on portals was nearly perfect, and it would last for days or even weeks. The hope was that they would be preventing the enemies from appearing among them, which would allow for a better defensive formation. Then, the waiting started. The signals were getting stronger by the hour, and the extent of the staging area was unclear, but the extra time was enough to get everyone to break out the big guns, forbidden weapons, and other questionable bits of technology that would never be used under normal circumstances. If this battle could be won, or even stalled long enough that the enemy could be whittled too low to be able to move on to another solar system with any level of effectiveness. Waiting sucks. Nico sighed as she painted giant smiley faces on the bottoms of the feet of her mecha. It's better than what comes after. The second wave is likely to be worse than the first. Max shrugged. As long as we can get far enough from the interference to send cutters and destroyers out to intercept other fleets when they tried to move. That was the best they could hope for because countless battles were destined to be lopsided one way or the other. None of the defenders knew how much of an attacking force they would face, or how the attack would be split up. The planets got military based on what was available, not by population or strategic importance. There wasn't time for anything else, but that also meant that the enemy wouldn't be able to predict where their forces were going to be. When the attack came, it came everywhere, all at once. Thousands of ships entered every inhabited star system in every galaxy of the Alliance, as well as the humans' home galaxy, within 10 seconds of each other. Above the Innu home world, 600 science vessels were encircled by 500,000 super-heavy mecha, and countless drone fighters. Even though they had not dared to risk using antimatter near so many ongoing experiments, the response to the invasion was devastating. Lead researcher, the mecha have begun the assault. Should we notify someone or something? One of the Innu ministers asked their local head of government. Everyone is trying to contact someone. Send out a message that we have been attacked and add it to the mess if you like, but nobody is coming. The Innu lead researcher replied. What do you mean, nobody is coming? The old woman pointed to a holographic map on the wall. The red marks are every system that has reported an attack in the last minute. It's everywhere, they hit every single inhabited star, unless they missed one accidentally. Nobody can answer because they're all fighting, just like we are. Now, keep up the reports on energy consumption, and shut down all civilian power grids to essential levels, unless they are making priority-level military equipment. I want as many weapons deployed as we can possibly get. Shut down the entire climate control grid until further notice. Even the air conditioning in the buildings. The situation above the central government capital was very nearly the same. They also hadn't dared to use antimatter weapons that they might not be able to escape the range of later if they needed to flee, so they were fighting a close-range fight near the planet itself. But their planetary defenses were among the finest in the universe, and within minutes, they had cleared the system of attackers and were preparing to shift some of the defense force to hard-fought battles that could still be won. Max and Nico listened carefully as the updates about these situations were relayed in real time, while looking out over the rubble at the edge of the Ray 5 system. They didn't make any attempt at tactical adjustments. They sent the same number of forces to every single inhabited system. Nico noted as she updated their battle map. Then we should be sending out the reinforcements based on the existing troop levels. With the use of extreme defensive weapons, some of our forces should still be in good working order. Max noted, doesn't this feel like a suicide attack to you? Just killing off as many planets as possible to reduce our numbers for whatever comes next would be precisely their style. Nico replied, what have you got for me, then? There are 2 locations where there should be troops, but there aren't. One is the Canis home world, which didn't receive an attack at all, and one is the Cygnus Imperial Capital system. Now, the Canis world makes sense. They might not have noticed that there was anyone living out in the remote boonies of the galaxy when they scanned. But the capital, there are 4 inhabited planets, over 100 billion people, and a massive military production base. There is no way to miss the energy signature from that. I can detect it from here. There has to be a reason that it wasn't attacked, and it's either a betrayal, which makes no sense, as every other planetary group, including their government planets, was attacked, or there is something there that they fear to approach. Max nodded. So, are you coming with me to the Cygnus capital? Nico's smirk said it all. She was definitely interested in why there was no attack on the capital, and she had an idea as to what the answer might be. For an instant, her guard on her thoughts slipped, and Max managed to peek into her convoluted mind. Nico was thinking that there was a god there, an energy signature that made them think that. The area was already claimed by one of their own. All they had to do was fly over and find out for themselves. Chapter 1262, Second wave. Any thoughts about going to the Cygnus imperial capital would have to wait, as only minutes after the invaders were repelled in the strongest of systems, the portals opened again, and a pair of greater energy beings, accompanied by a horde of lesser energy beings, flooded through into reality. There was an energy signature following them, protecting them from the damaged laws and empty alternate layers of this region, Max noticed. That could only mean that the gods had made their move, and that this was the full offensive, everything that the enemy could possibly send. Both Nico and Max flew out of the hangar bays of Absolution, moving to intercept before the enemy could pose a threat to the lives aboard their flagship, while the defensive armies prepared to disperse this second wave with a massive disintegrator wave. They knew that it was effective, and that the energy beings had nowhere to run to escape the attacks, so there was no hesitation. As the first time, because of the massed firepower, the battle at Ray 5 was a single-sided slaughter. The enemy didn't even try to increase their numbers here, they just sent the same force everywhere and counted everything as acceptable losses. But they weren't done with Ray 5, and after the first burst, the greater energy beings began rapidly absorbing the energy from the lesser members of their force to reform themselves, and finish the attack. Nico, you're with me. Intercept as much of that energy as possible for use in the new mecha. Max ordered as he charged toward the edge of the solar system. Max checked his sensors to make sure that the enemy wasn't going to break through their lines and get any closer to the planet than where they were fighting, but found the strangest phenomenon. They were already bleeding energy, and quickly. It was being pulled from their bodies to the deepest reaches of the barren layers, and despite their powers, they seemed helpless to stop it. That would never do. That energy was his, and he wasn't going to let the rebel gods use it to empower themselves enough to attack. He fired his mass drivers, equipped with antimatter explosives, into the attacking wave of greater energy beings, tearing a sea of energy free of them, but no matter how hard he tried, it was being pulled away into the deepest reaches of space. Something's not right. There is something else here with a stronger attractive force than my equipment can manage. Nico complained. Crap, Max knew what it was. The Darklings had warned him that the dead gods were placed here. If their bodies were still more naturally attuned to the energy of their kin than he was, they wouldn't be able to replenish the storage for their mecha at all, except by having him and Nico generate it in this layer of space. Send the others forward with us. If we can pull it in early enough, we can at least maximize what we can hold as it flows over. There aren't a lot of the demigod mecha, but it should be enough to keep them fighting for the rest of this battle. The void filled with the pulse of energy weapons as the combined force of demigod mecha moved forward behind them, burying the attacking wave in light, while limitless energy poured into them from the other side of the portal they had used to get here. No matter how much was torn away, how much damage his weapons did to their shields, they were being replenished by their gods. Their counterattack slammed into the shielding of the incoming mecha, doing little damage, but sending them flying, and the attacking wave began to spread into a spherical pattern to surround the Ray 5 system. That's a pretty good trap. We can't get to the stable region to use portals to get to the rest of the universe until we kill them all, but their gods are bleeding power to keep us here, while whatever is hiding in the dead layers takes the spoils of war. Max noted. A translucent energy being formed a face that looked like a bull's and smiled at Max as he came to the realization that the enemy never had any intention of fighting him. They were just here to trap the real fighting force of the humans and their descendants inside, while the energy beings' allies ravaged the rest of the universe. Nico, align the two world ships. I want a portal opened outside to send the demigod mecha through. Do it as suddenly as possible, before the enemy can react. Max ordered. If the enemy wasn't going to properly attack, there was no need for him to properly defend. They would send the strongest mecha out to the worst battles and turn the tides back with an ocean of blood. Not even the destroyer-class cathedral ships could withstand a full barrage from those mecha. One per system would be enough to go on a rampage before they were destroyed or ran out of stored energy, and that should buy some more time for humanity to fight back. While Nico worked on the portal, and the demigod mecha gathered into a cluster to attack the barrier that was going up around the Ray 5 system looking for weak points, Max mentally sorted through the messages they were receiving. The first wave was just as devastating as expected, and a number of systems hadn't broadcast anything past the first attack report, but others were arranging to help defend neighbors, and none of them had reported the incursion of the second wave, or at least not at this level. Many of them reported energy beings, but in large numbers, the battleships and super heavy mecha could deal with one greater being. Unless there were attacks that ended too quickly to be reported, it looked like every greater energy being in existence was right here, around the Ray 5 system. Instead, he turned his mind to seeing what the attackers were thinking. Chapter 1263, Dispersed Pattern. Max's search of the minds of the greater energy beings linked him into the mental equivalent of a large group chat, much like what the Illithid had among their own species. They had to know that he was listening in, but their thoughts said that it didn't matter and that they would be able to crush him soon enough, and then there wasn't a force left in the galaxy that could counter them. The humans' home galaxy was fated to fall first, and then their subspecies and outlying galaxies would fall later, until everything in this region was destroyed, and then they would retreat before they had been siphoned of so much energy that the dead gods buried here could revive. That was an interesting bit of news. It didn't change much, since they were already here and attacking, leaving Max no time to do anything but deal with them, but the fact that their mere presence was waking up gods that were previously defeated in the Eternal War was enough to give him ideas about stalling for time. At first, that was what he thought that they were doing, but that wasn't it. They were just gathering their forces for one massive push against him in particular. If Max had known that, he would have gone to an uninhabited system to fight it out, instead of being here at Ray 5 to defend his people. But there was no use crying over spilled rum. Nico, stay close to me. They're going to push hard, and directly for us. Their goal is to eliminate me so that they can overrun the rest of the galaxy. They don't know or don't understand about the rest of the demigod-class Mecha. Max explained. They need 30 seconds, and then they will be gone. Do you think that we can hold this position without them, though? Nico replied. I know we can. It might not be pretty, but we can hold this system even against them. The problem is that if one of their gods actually manages to come through, there is nothing that we can do to stop the assault. From what I understand of the myceloid god, it is more than the sum of its parts. Breaking it might cause the birth of hundreds of greater energy beings, but its power is thousands of times more than what the secondary creations can wield. If one of them comes through, all that we can do is try to blast them back out of our layer of reality and hope that it works. Nico sent him a smiley face emoji in response. Prepare for them to push. All forces to the ready. Max ordered the second that their thoughts changed. They were still hesitant, as they couldn't accept the knowledge that many of them were about to cease to exist, but the humans were well past that point. They weren't even worried about using forbidden weapons in their own home star system. There was no grand charge, the power of the enemy was beyond the need for such mundane things. Instead, they simply transformed into an ethereal form and appeared in front of Max and Nico, all lashing out with every bit of energy that they had. The void shields flared, and the overload notification flashed as Max activated the disintegrator and began to pour the refined energy from his body into the mecha. Nico laughed as she fired the thunder guns point blank into the energy cloud that surrounded them, and a massive antimatter explosion tore through space, accompanied by a surge of portal energy. You like that? I found your dead gods, now go meet them. She taunted as the energy from the destroyed creatures was siphoned away from the battle. The force of the blast collapsed the shields on both mecha, and threw them backwards at thousands of kilometers an hour, but the enemy was undeterred, following as closely as possible, while Max discharged every weapon that he had. Then he also set off the thunder guns, but behind the enemy, to drive them closer to him, so he could siphon the loose energy before it was torn away by the sleeping god. A million points of light converged on the battle as the defenders of Ray 5 fired their first volley, and the greater energy beings promptly fled into another layer of space to evade, before trying to return. But when they did, they found themselves trapped. The Darklings and Arisen were there waiting for them, and they had destabilized the layer too much for the great enemy to leave before the combined force of the two species' fleets could bear down on them. Hundreds of greater energy beings died instantly, and the rest prepared to flee. This battle was not worth it. The humans knew they were coming and made preparations with the other species. All that was left for the energy beings to do was die. Max could feel the hatred and power radiating from the other side of the portal, the link to the home of the great enemy, and the intent of the survivors to flee home. But the portal only existed in this layer, and Max was coating it in his own energy, warping it into a one-way edifice that would only allow more attackers to arrive, but none to leave. With that, he should be able to finally deal with the greater energy beings, and the greatest threats to humanity and the other mortal species. Commander, the demigods have been sent. They are in 1,000 other battlefields now. Nico reported. Excellent work. As soon as we finish here, I will be waiting for the good news from the rest of the galaxy. The energy around Max suddenly changed, and a solid planet began to take shape around the portal, created from the other side, with an attractive force that was pulling him in. The god of the great enemy had taken action, and like the myceloid god, it had made a battlefield, but one only suitable for those with enough power. It would be Max and Nico versus the entire surviving force of the greater energy beings. Chapter 1264. Face off. The two groups stood across an open field from each other, tensely waiting for the stalemate to be broken. Barely 200 of the greater energy beings were left, out of the 1,000 or more that had started this battle, against Max and Nico, in their mecha. Gloriana. Nico had named his new mecha Gloriana, a fitting title for the defense of the known universe, and an ironic nod to the mecha of Max's past life. For her own, she had chosen Death of Hope, and for a change, it was not red and bone white. This one was polished black with gold trim, a stark contrast against the shining gold with a few black fittings on Gloriana. The great enemy understood that there would be no running this time, no turning incorporeal to try to escape, as it would only cause them to burn through energy faster. Their only hope was to hold their shapes and fight it out with these two mecha, so that the rest of the forces would have a chance to finish their work and eliminate humanity once and for all. Are we planning to fight them or stare at them? Nico asked. Both. The longer they delay, the more of their power they are losing. Can you feel it being pulled away from them? Max replied. I get it. Let them exhaust themselves first, then kill them all. Hey, do you think these are the last of them? If we finish a species, that's worth bonus points, isn't it? Max laughed at Nico's attempt at humor. Indeed, it is worth bonus points. But I'm not certain that this is the last, and when we break their god, there are likely to be more of them. Even Nico wasn't sure if she should be happy about that news, but as they stared down the great enemy, Max could sense that they were far more terrified to be in combat at all than he was to fight 100 to 1 odds. They were not the combat-minded sorts, they were simply forced into the role for the sake of the battle, and thanks to their immense power. That would be an advantage for Max and Nico, who would have no qualms about eliminating them, and who had far more experience in the matter than these enemies had killing humans. The enemy tensed, preparing to launch an assault, and both mecha unleashed their fury. At the exact moment that the mass drive's brutal bark sounded, ion bombard arrays flashed with power, coated in the stolen energy from their opponents that the two pilots had integrated into their bodies. Disintegrator energy pulsed a split second later, avoiding interference with the first round of attacks, and then fusion fire spread from the two mecha toward the enemy. In return, laser beams of energy sizzled in the atmosphere, and blades were formed in massive hands, prepared to charge. The ground shook with the force of the attacks, and the stabilizers on Gloriana struggled to keep up, even with Max's targeting assistance from the system. This planet that the god had made was not well suited to such a battle, and the power of the combatants was tearing the magnetic field apart after the first volley. Forward! The leader of the great enemy mentally shouted, urging his troops into close combat. Nico and Max set aside their ion bombard arrays, locking them to the back of their mecha, and drew dual blades. Warp bubbles formed around the two mecha, distorting space as Max raced toward his targets and then destabilized the field, creating a massive shockwave that threw the enemy to the ground. Glowing golden blades sliced through simulated flesh, and Max surged with stolen power as his opponent was drained dry. Beside him, Nico kicked a corpse out of the way, then sliced it in half for good measure. The sight panicked the enemy forces. There were too many of them to fight in this form, the mecha would be surrounded by only a few of them, and none wanted to be the next to die. Cowardly, through and through, Max decided, but they sure do die well. Nico agreed, but in its rage, the Divine One had forgotten why it could not enter this place, and the flow of energy did not stop. 1956 light flashed to his left, and Max raised a blade to parry a downward chop, then slid backward with his thrusters to avoid a thrust. A quick blast from the mass drivers obliterated both opponents, and left a flickering afterimage on the sensors from the nuclear radiation. They would have to deal with that later, he decided. The great enemy moved behind a low hill to regroup and formulate a plan, forgetting that Max could hear their every thought. This fight was too lopsided after the massacre by the other two mortal races, and none of their reinforcements had arrived. You will fight. Any traitor that retreats is an enemy of the Divine One. A booming mental voice echoed through the Ray 5 system. Even the regular humans on the planet's surface heard it, and the mental force caused many to collapse, screaming in pain. Did you just call yourself the Divine One? Seriously, talk about a big ego. Max taunted as he bombarded the hapless greater energy beings that were trapped here with him. That was likely a terrible idea, but if he waited until the so-called Divine One got the enemy moving and organized, they might just win. The rage of the god was immediate and intense, sending out a wave of energy that tore apart the planet and disintegrated the last of the greater energy beings, while hurling Max and Nico through space as their mecha struggled to keep a layer of shielding up against the attack. But in its rage, the Divine One had forgotten why it could not enter this place, and the flow of energy did not stop. Sylvie, are you still online? Help me get the breakers reset and the main power back online. I need a shield and I need thrusters, the rest can wait. Max requested of the AI whose avatar projector he always kept with him. I am here. I'm cut off from the rest of my processing power, but I can do enough. My other avatar is with Nico, their mecha is also intact, but disabled. Sylvie explained as she worked. Max opened the hatch below the cockpit and ducked down into the space, floating slightly as the gravity plating became discharged, and began using the repair tool to replace blown-out circuit boards and wires. We've got shields. I'm working on thrusters and general mobility now. Can you reach CX-4A? Sylvie requested. I'm on it. Yeah, it's totally fried. Give me a second to rebuild the traces, and we will be working again. Chapter 1265. Revival. Max could feel the universe shifting, as a power imbalance that he had never been able to feel before was redistributed, and the layers of space began to come to life. The life force of the god that called himself the Divine One was being siphoned off, along with what felt like the entire stored power of whatever dimensional pocket it had been hiding in. The god was trapped by the force, unable to retreat, and Max could feel the panic as it called for its compatriots to come rescue it and pull its essence back into the pocket dimension. Max's first instinct was to collapse the portal and force the god into this layer, in this star system, but so far, he only had shields back online, and he didn't yet have any mobility, much less full weapon output. The rest of the defensive fleet could try, if they had the capability, but by their thoughts, they weren't in any condition either. The force of the last attack had disabled everything within nearly a light year, and they were floating dead in space as they frantically reset breakers and tried to get their power systems to reboot. The power of the Divine One was waning, while the power hidden in the dead zone was growing, and the fabric of space felt like it was about to collapse back into a single layer, as it had theoretically been at the creation of the universe. If Max had the astronomical ability, he would have realized that the entire visible universe was indeed being pulled inward at an alarming rate, and the distance between every other star in the center of his galaxy had contracted by nearly 1%, but with his systems offline, all that he could do was watch the show in front of him and try to siphon as much of the power for himself as possible. The energy of the Divine One was different from anything that he had absorbed before. It felt like he was gaining an understanding of the basic laws of the universe as he took it in and created an irreversible change to the very nature of his existence. Max ignored the changes in himself as he stole the energy of a self-proclaimed god, determined to prevent the creature from ever reforming, but the vast majority was not being taken by him, but by whatever was at the center of this galaxy, hidden in a forgotten layer of space. Then, the rescue finally came, and the other gods pulled the Divine One back into its pocket dimension, weakened and dying. That didn't stop the bleeding power, though. The energy of the god and the pocket dimension were still being siphoned by both Max and the slowly reviving god here, preventing the portal from closing. If he could just get the mecha back online, he could wound the others as well, and pull them into this maelstrom of power to bleed them dry. He was so close to victory over the rebel gods that he could taste it, but so far away. However, the Divine One wasn't the only one with reinforcements. Just as Max thought all hope was lost, and the portal would be forcefully closed, a gigantic asteroid hurtled through it, seemingly out of nowhere, and a billion myceloid minds cheered in victory. They had found the greatest fight in the universe just in time to not miss it, and their presence in the pocket dimension gave their god enough of a foothold to force the opening even wider, nearly collapsing the space and throwing the occupants out into the prime layer. Nico, if you can hear me, we've got assistance already here. The myceloids are on our side, just hold position until your mecha is fully back online, then we can rejoin the fight. Max broadcast, both with his internal transmitter and his mental power. Got it, 3 minutes is all I need, and we should be operational again. All across the universe, battles raged, but here in the humans' home galaxy, the situation was much more dire. 1,000 demigod-class mecha were facing off in 1,000 different star systems against 1,000 greater energy beings, and the backlash from their battle was tearing reality itself apart. Nothing was held back, and there was no thought of consequences. If they did not win the battle, there would be no humanity left, so they did everything that they could to destroy the enemy and prayed that the aftermath was something that could be survived. At the very least, the anomaly region still had a massive fleet of warships on standby with hundreds of millions of humans on board. Even if they killed their home galaxy, there should still be enough of them to start over somewhere new. In the Alliance, planets slowly burned as the fleets assembled around the survivors to wait for a second wave that never came. Every vessel that the great enemy's army had was already thrown at the humans and ground into stardust. They could see the battles raging on their sensors, but the destruction and destabilization of space in that galaxy was too much. They simply couldn't go there to help. From her office on Ray 5, Mary Tereth looked up at the sky, where a vortex of purple energy raged, blurring out the battle that was surely ongoing, and blocking her sensors to the point that she could no longer see her daughter fighting. On the desk in front of her sat a sealed armored crate, sent to her by Nico in the middle of the battle when the demigod-class mecha were deployed. It was set to open in 48 hours, long enough that the fight would certainly be over before she could see what was inside. "Just hold on, we will open it together," she mumbled to herself as the entire planet shook with the spatial distortions. Only the most durable of buildings were even standing anymore, and it was time for her to move out into the shuttle, where she would be safe from the prospect of having a building collapse on her. "Assistant, kindly bring the present with us. We will join the other council members above the city," she announced. They wouldn't run to orbit. It was better that the people of Ray 5 see the shuttles hovering over the city while the assistant sent out the emergency safety broadcasts. If the people thought that they had run away, it would be chaos, and there would be even more loss of lives than was actually due to the disaster itself. Chapter 1266. Face to face with mortality. Max, the power is back up and the mecha is fully operational. "What is your order?" Sylvie requested. Both Gloriana and Death of Hope were floating side by side, slowly moving from the vicinity of the 8th planet toward the 7th, while in front of them, the battle at the portal raged. "Is Nico back online?" "Affirmative. She is back online and using her system skills to make adjustments to her unit." "Then we will rejoin the battle." The two mecha moved forward toward the pocket dimension, where the full fury of the myceloid horde, empowered by their god and glowing with green energy, was facing off against a dozen gods. The chances of them winning were between slim and none unless the myceloid god directly intervened, but with Max and Nico, there might be a chance. Then, they hit a barrier. Mere meters from the entrance, they were stopped from rejoining the fight, blocked in their own lair as the portal distorted in front of them. "Sylvie, what does your analysis tell you about that?" Max asked. None of the gods seemed to be aware of it. Not even the myceloid god, who was expecting them to rejoin the fight at any moment now that he had seen their mecha moving again. Max adjusted the scanners. There had to be a way past that barrier, no matter what it was made of. If he couldn't finish the fight with the great enemy here and now, they would only withdraw, hide and spend eons rebuilding their strength before they attacked again. He couldn't, no wouldn't, allow that to happen. It's impregnable. There is something about that which feels familiar, but I can't place it. But I can say for certain that there is nothing in our arsenal that can break that shield. Sylvie decided. "Feels familiar?" Max asked. "I have encountered that phenomenon before, but the time and location stamps of the data entry are gone." "I am sorry, Commander, I wish I could be of more help." Max turned to face Nico so he could look at her not just through the cameras, but through the viewport on the mecha. Her thoughts were just as baffled and frustrated as his own, and there was nothing that she could think of that would let them join this fight. With a sudden pulse of energy, everything went black. "Damn it, get the sensors back online." Max cussed. "Sensors are online, Commander, there is no light or ambient radiation here." "Switching modes," Sylvie replied. Everything stood still outside of Gloriana, even weapon attacks were frozen in place, hanging halfway between targets that looked as if they were stuck in time. That was it, they were stuck in time. And so was he. Gloriana was turned to look downward, and two glowing golden eyes looked back at Max through the darkness. "Eternal Champion, you have returned." A soft, grandfatherly voice whispered in his mind. "God of Time, you have awakened." "But how? It was said that you were killed, utterly destroyed." Max replied, "You can't kill time. To truly kill a natural god, you must remove their aspect from the universe. In the last moment of my life, I froze myself. And now, here you are, bearing gifts unlike any other to help me revive. For eons now, I have watched the mortals. I must say, I misjudged them at the start. They are not the plague upon the universe that I thought they were. Mortals are the free electrons, the wandering energy that spreads change and rebalances the universe, remaking the changes wrought by the gods into a coherent picture. For that reason, when I fully awaken, I will grant you a gift." The god paused, and waited while Max's suspicious thoughts tried to determine if he was being tricked. For the god of time was not the only god that was here. Max could sense another core, a flicker of life that represented a second god, the original god of humanity, which fell in the first stages of the eternal war. Like the god of time, she was not truly dead, and couldn't be as long as humanity existed. All she needed was something to bring her back. Something that Max had with him. The collected energy of the Divine One and 1,000 greater energy beings, kept in the separate body attached to Max's energy. It was surely intended to be used for something else, but if he inserted it into the form of the fallen god, it would be enough to restart her growth. With that, the rebel gods wouldn't dare to touch humanity again. Two gods on their side, their own and the myceloid god, were too much for the great enemy to overcome. The god of time seemed amused by Max's thoughts. "You do not have enough energy to fully awaken a god. Not even close to it. But in 1,000 years, the devotion of your people could bring her back to her former strength. Yes, that is the path, we will try that this time." The god of time wasn't making much sense, but if he could awaken the god of humanity, it would change the balance of the battle, and perhaps she could do as he had done and plunder some of the spoils for herself to increase her growth speed. Max made his move, focusing on the body of the fallen god, but before he could act, a dozen battered-looking gods were standing in front of him, each bleeding deeply and covered in green blood. The myceloids had definitely gotten their fight. "We will not allow it. Never again, you have been banished and she should never have existed. The god of humanity will not be awakened." The god closest to Max announced. "You cannot stop us." Max simply replied as his weapons charged. Nico's smile was so powerful that even the gods in front of him trembled before steeling their resolve and attacking. Or at least trying to. The interference of the god of time slowed everything to a creep, with the immense suppression of the time domain trying to lock them in place. Likewise, Max could only wait and watch as both sides built their energy to a crescendo, and then unleashed it into the middle to collide with a reality, bending force that shattered everything, including the law of time that was binding them. Max charged forward, slicing apart the toga-clad figure of the closest god and feeding the released energy to the corpse of the human god. Then a tiger god fell beneath his blade, and a twisted tree that emitted filthy black slime. The sound of rending steel caught Max's attention as Nico's boots stomped down on the neck of an armored deity, and its head rolled free of its body. The remaining few gods fled as the power of the god of time grew again, and Max made one last desperate push, guiding all of his stored energy into the body of the human god, filling it with the second body of energy that he had so carefully compressed. "That is enough out of all of you. You will behave," the god of time demanded. Its words spread through the universe, reaching through space and time to find every hidden human, god and energy being. Max found himself outside of his Mecha, standing on the ground next to Nico, and looking up at the immense and vague form of the god of time. "Every time we do this, it is the same thing. Reality is broken and the gods die. But no more." Everything went black again, and Max wondered if time had stopped. Then a vague voice came to his ears. "I'll just have to work with what I have." The woman's voice whispered beside him. "Now, if you will just sign your name and the child's, you're ready for discharge." A much clearer young woman's voice caught Max's attention. "No, oh hell no. It couldn't be. Not even the god of time would be that cruel. What do I name this child? That simply couldn't be born a girl." He heard his mother's voice asking. "Karis Max, you will name me Karis Max or by the gods I will kill you now." "Karis is nice, I will name him Karis Max." Across the city, a familiar mind caught his attention. A memory full of Mecha, of gods, death and genocide. This time they would not lose, the god of time was going to get what was coming to him.